Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on the LIHEAP Quarterly Performance and Management Report for Tribes and Tribal Organizations. My name is Heather Jones, and I'm the Policy and Evaluation Branch Chief for the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program within the Division of Energy Assistance, located within the Office of Community Services. Today is the start of our series of training and technical assistance opportunities before the first quarterly reporting deadline. Thank you for joining us. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Katie Green, DEA Special Assistant, to cover some of the housekeeping items and kick off our discussion.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. Today, we will start with a high-level overview of the quarterly reporting requirements, including why OCS is implementing a quarterly report. Heather will then provide a step-by-step walkthrough of the quarterly report form. And during today's webinar, our staff will answer some questions via the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we will also select some questions from the Q&A box to discuss during the Q&A session towards the end of the agenda. To ensure that we don't accidentally miss any questions, please use the Q&A box for questions and the chat box for all comments and greetings. Finally, the webinar slides are available now. I just put them in the chat. This webinar is also being recorded and will be published on our website shortly. So before we dive into the specifics of the report and the required data collection elements, we want to begin by sharing why OCS is asking grant recipients to report on a quarterly basis. In designing this report, we strive to only ask for information that we absolutely need to minimize the reporting burden for grant recipients to the greatest extent possible. We recognize and want to acknowledge that quarterly reports are new and that tribes have not had to report on some of the data requirements in other reports so far. And we want you to know, we want to thank you, first of all, for being here and let you know that we're committed to helping you work through these new requirements and providing the training and technical assistance you need in order to submit these reports. Throughout this process, we sought feedback from our grant recipients and stakeholders and made changes wherever possible to further reduce grant recipient burden. OCS is implementing the LIHEAP quarterly reports to help strengthen the program and improve our ability to highlight the impact LIHEAP is having on households across the country. The quarterly reports will help OCS track key information in near real time. Currently, our office does not receive comprehensive performance and management data until approximately 3 months after the end of each federal fiscal year. So these LIHEAP quarterly reports will assist us in receiving data and information about LIHEAP during the current federal fiscal year. This almost real-time data will be particularly important this year as LIHEAP grant recipients both administer historic levels of LIHEAP funding and develop and implement plans to reach the most vulnerable households amidst the ongoing energy price increases. These reports will also be critical in helping us address challenges in a timely manner, including unmet training and technical assistance needs, approaching obligation deadlines, and challenges related to outreach and intake, such as reaching newly eligible populations. We learned from our collective efforts to obligate CARES Act funding that timely obligation information was essential to ensuring that almost all available funds were leveraged and not returned to the Treasury. Given that the ARP allocation is significantly larger than the CARES Act allocation, this is especially important as we get closer to the September 30th obligation deadline. Finally, as many of you know, LIHEAP has received significant interest and inquiry from the White House, HHS, and Congress this year. Because the Paperwork Reduction Act limits our ability to collect ad hoc data from more than 9 grant recipients, the quarterly report will allow us to respond to frequent inquiries regarding the program with timely and accurate information. So as folks may know, we received emergency clearance from OMB to implement quarterly reports in mid-February on the 18th. This opened up a 60-day public comment period, which will close on April 17th. We welcome and encourage public comment from our grant recipients and stakeholders, and OCS will be assessing and considering public comments before finalizing the tool for use in the remainder of this fiscal year and future fiscal years. After reviewing and responding publicly to comments received, very similar to how we did recently with the LIHEAP annual and quarterly new reports. So after we review and respond to the comments, we will submit an extension request to OMB, which will open a final 30-day comment period. And once we respond to any final comments that come in through that comment period, we will seek and receive OMB approval. The reports will be approved for use for the next 3 years. And while there's an urgent need for quarterly reports this year with the American Rescue Plan obligation deadline, rising energy prices, and the ongoing pandemic, quarterly reports will be incredibly important and continue to be incredibly important in future years as well for the reasons described on the last slide. And it is our hope to include the quarterly report in the OLDC system in future years. So the time periods and anticipated due dates for quarterly reports in the first reporting year are provided on this slide. Fiscal year 2022 reporting will begin with data from October 1st, 2021. However, the first and second quarters will be combined and due on April 29th, 2022. And so for fiscal year 2022, OCS has consolidated quarters 1 and 2 to provide grantees with more time to gather the requested data and get used to reporting on a quarterly basis. Before each report is due, OCS will issue instructions for submission via an action transmittal, and OCS plans to issue this action transmittal for the first report deadline on April 29th as soon as possible. However, the form we release in the AT is the same one grant recipients already have, with the exception that we'll be adding the final OMB control number to the form we send out in the action transmittal. But basically that same form, all of the content, all of the data is the same. And we did that so that folks wouldn't have to wait on the AT to have an understanding of the types of data that we're collecting. So that form was made available for immediate use. As you've seen in prior communications regarding the quarterly report, this year the forms will be submitted in an Excel spreadsheet, and we are asking tribes and tribal organizations to email the reports to liheap@acf.hhs.gov. And again, more information about the submission process will be included in the forthcoming AT. As mentioned before, in future years and after we receive normal final OMB regular clearance, we plan to collect the quarterly reports in OLDC. And as Heather mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is just one event in our series of training and technical assistance on the quarterly report. To help LIHEAP recipients prepare for quarterly reporting, the first reporting period in particular, OCS will host 5 office hours to support state, territory, and tribal LIHEAP grant recipients. So each session will be limited to 15 individuals at a time to maximize assistance, and folks can register on a first come, first served basis. We're asking grant recipients to please pre-register and include any potential questions you would like to be addressed by OCS staff in the registration form. This, of course, does not preclude grant recipients from asking additional questions during the session, but instead is intended to allow us to cover frequently asked questions early on in the session or through written guidance so that we can maximize the time we have during each office hour. And as you'll see on the slide here, we've designated certain sessions for states and territories, and others are designated for tribes. So we've highlighted here the sessions for tribes, which will be occurring on April 5th and April 12th. So thanks to the folks that have already registered for those. And if you haven't, we'll be sharing at the end the link to where you can register for those sessions. And we will also be publishing the frequently asked questions from this webinar and the office hours following all sessions. And we look forward to answering your questions throughout the webinar today and during the upcoming office hours in April. And with that, I will turn it over to Heather to walk through the quarterly report.
Thank you, Katie. Before we walk through the specific sections of the report, we want to provide a brief overview of the data we are asking grant recipients to collect on a quarterly basis. Section 1 will ask you to report the total number of unduplicated households assisted each quarter and the unduplicated household count for the quarter from the previous years for the same time period. Section 2 will ask you to report the number of times a household received LIHEAP assistance that prevented loss of home energy and the number of times LIHEAP restored services. Section 3 will ask about the amount of LIHEAP funding that has been obligated. Section 4 of the LIHEAP Quarterly Report includes questions concerning LIHEAP program implementation and support. These include yes and no questions regarding program changes, collaboration, coordination, training and technical assistance, and quotes from stakeholders, lessons learned, notable accomplishments, and challenges. There are some key definitions to keep in mind when completing the LIHEAP Quarterly Report. LIHEAP defines the term household as any individual or group of individuals who are living together as one economic unit for whom energy services are customarily purchased in common or who make an undesignated payment for those services in the form of rent. Household members are those individuals who comprise a LIHEAP household unit. LIHEAP reporting includes counting the household, not the head of household or the persons in the household. Grant recipients are required to report unduplicated counts of LIHEAP assisted households for all types of LIHEAP assistance provided each quarter. Unduplicated count means that each households are only counted once. The LIHEAP report, as Katie indicated, template is an Excel workbook. An example of how the report looks is on this slide, and we will refer to these screenshots in the slides to come during this presentation. It was designed to be a cumulative report with separate worksheets for each quarter. As you know, quarter 1 and 2 have been combined together, and then we have quarter 3 and 4. We will now take a look at the different sections of the LIHEAP Quarterly Report. The first portion of the report you will notice is called the Recipient Information. In the Recipient Information section, you will include all the information being requested, including name, phone number, and email address for the individual who is filling out the quarterly data report and the person who should be contacted if OCS has questions concerning the report. Section 1 of the quarterly report, you will report on the total households assisted. This data requires that the recipient to report the total number of unduplicated households assisted during that quarter. This includes all program types of heating, cooling, crisis, and weatherization during that quarter. Currently, tribes and tribal organizations report the total number of households by program types for the annual LIHEAP household report short form. For the quarterly report, you are being asked to provide an unduplicated assistance quarter, the unduplicated assistance household total for each quarter. An assisted household is one that has applied and received LIHEAP assistance. Households that have applied for LIHEAP benefit but have not received one by the end of the quarter should be counted in the quarter the household actually receives those benefits. Grant recipients are also asked to report the total number of households assisted across program components during the same time period last year. OCS will stop asking for this data once we have the data from the prior year quarter and include this data. However, because the first 2 quarters are collapsed for the first reporting year in fiscal year 2022, you will need to report these households assisted during the same period for the first 2 quarters next year. After quarter 2 in FY23, OCS will pre-populate this data from the prior year's quarterly report. Being able to compare households assisted across years by different quarters will allow us and you to better respond to stakeholders. Lately, we have all received many questions about how current service levels compare to prior years. Quarter 3 and 4 will include a section for total cumulative households assisted. This number will automatically calculate based on the information the recipient provides in the prior quarterly reports. An unduplicated count again means that the households are only to be counted once, regardless of the types of assistance they receive in the same quarter. For example, even if a household receives heating assistance and crisis assistance within the same quarter, the household will only be counted once in that quarter. Households that receive assistance in different quarters, however, will be counted in each quarter. So let's take a look at an example of how to report unduplicated households assisted for the quarterly report. Again, Households assisted should be reported in each quarter they receive assistance. In this example, we have 3 households, household A, B, and C. Household A received assistance October 30th, 2022, and crisis assistance February 1st, 2022. So for the combined quarter 1 and 2 household would only be counted once, as both of these dates were within the quarter 1 timeframe of October 1st through March 31st. Household B received heating assistance October 30th, 2022, and crisis assistance April 1st, 2022. So it would be counted in quarter 1 and 2 for the heating assistance and quarter 3 for the crisis assistance, as the date of April 1st, 2022 was within the 3rd quarter timeframe, April 1st through June 30th. Household C received heating assistance October 30th, 2021. They received crisis assistance April 1st, 2022, and cooling assistance August 1st, 2022. So they would be counted in quarter 1 and 2 for the heating assistance, and quarter 3 for the crisis assistance, and quarter 4 for the cooling assistance. So now let's take a look how the total unduplicated households assisted by quarter. For quarter 1 and 2, the total unduplicated households assisted is 3, household A, B, and C. For quarter 3, the total unduplicated households assisted is 2. That would be household B and C. And for quarter 4, the total unduplicated household assisted would be 1. Household C, as in our example, it was the only household to receive assistance between July 1st and September 30th. In the next line for quarter 3 and 4, you will see the total cumulative households assisted for quarter 3 would be 5, 3 from quarter 1 and 2, and 2 from quarter 3. The total cumulative household for quarter 4 would be 6, 5 from quarter 3, and 1 from quarter 4. Because the same households can be included in unduplicated counts in different quarters, this can make the total cumulative households assisted count include the same households from previous quarters. For Section 2 performance management, you will need to report the total occurrences where households received assistance to prevent or restore home energy by each quarter. Currently, tribes and tribal organizations do not report these occurrences. However, many of you may ask households to report on whether or not they currently have home energy services or in threat of disconnection at the time of the application. You may also track this as a part of your crisis assistance benefits that you issue. This information can be used to count the total occurrences for prevention and restoration of services. This count will include duplicate households that receive assistance more than once. This duplicate count of occurrences may also include occurrences where weatherization or equipment repair and replacement benefits are included. This may require that you coordinate with your weatherization partners to identify inoperable equipment that was repaired or replaced using LIHEAP funding. For Section 3, estimated use of LIHEAP funds, you will report the amount, not the percentage, of LIHEAP funding that has been obligated for each funding source, including the LIHEAP FY 2022 non-supplemental funding or the regular LIHEAP block grant funding, and the American Rescue Act Plan 2021 funding. We have also included a placeholder for any additional supplement allotments. These obligated funds will be reported cumulatively from one quarter to the next. For example, if you obligate $500,000 of the regular block grant in quarter 1, and in quarter 3 did not have any additional obligations, then the LIHEAP 2022 non-supplemental amount would remain the same of $500,000 in quarter 3. If in quarter 4 you obligate an additional $75,000, then the LIHEAP 2022 non-supplemental amount or regular block grant would indicate a total amount of $575,000. This information requested about funding is included on your carryover and reallotment reports. You may need to work with your fiscal staff to obtain the LIHEAP obligated and expended amounts. Please note, use of funds represent a tribe's obligation of federal LIHEAP funds, not the expenditure of federal funds. In some cases, obligated funds are not actually expended until after the end of the federal fiscal year. For additional guidance on expenditures, DEA has issued an information memorandum on December 17, 2021 that provides clarification of obligation and expenditure. It is important that OCS receives this information to assist with training and technical assistance to ensure grant recipients obligate both the FY 2022 regular block grant and the American Rescue Plan funding. The funding must be obligated by September 30th, 2022. And if not, in the case of the regular block grant, these funds could be reallocated. And for the American Rescue Plan funding, they will need to be returned to the United States Treasury. Section 4 includes LIHEAP program implementation and support. You will be asked 10 questions in the combined quarter 1 and 2, and also in quarter 3. There will be 12 questions in quarter 4. The first 7 questions will include a yes/no drop-down and then a space where you can provide a brief explanation. Let's take a look at these first 7 questions. In quarter 1 and 2, you're being asked if you made any changes since submitting your current LIHEAP model plan to income guidelines, income verification or documentation requirements, changes to outreach strategies, benefit matrix, or increasing your crisis maximum amounts. If you change prioritizing vulnerable population, including elderly, disabled, and young children, or if you've changed policies on arrearage forgiveness that include paying off a client's outstanding energy bill, or any other changes you've made in your LIHEAP policies. These questions are being separated to track responses to add to future data tables for further evaluation. These same type of questions will be asked in quarters 3 and 4 to track the progression of changes. So let's take a look at quarter 3's questions. In quarter 3, the first 7 questions are the same, except you will need to provide any changes that you've made since quarter 1 and 2, and to provide an explanation of those changes. In quarter 4, again, the same questions are asked, and you will be asked if you've made any changes, what were the results after making these changes, and again, to provide a brief explanation. Now let's take a look at questions 8 through 10 for quarter 1 and 2. These questions ask you about your collaboration efforts, challenges, and training and technical assistance requests, and also ask you to include a quote about the impact of LIHEAP from a LIHEAP household. Please note these questions change in quarter 3 and 4. For quarter 3, questions 8 through 10 ask you to provide any additional information on the results of any changes made in the first 2 quarters. If you are continuing to collaborate with other utility programs, and to provide examples of such successful collaborations, and also to provide a quote about the impact of LIHEAP from a staff member, government official, or stakeholder. These questions again will change in quarter 4. For quarter 4, questions 8 through 10 ask grant recipients to share notable accomplishments and successes achieved during the fiscal year, challenges with administering LIHEAP this year, and requests for you to list out lessons learned as it relates to administering LIHEAP. Questions 11 and 12 ask you as the grant recipient for what OCS can do better in the upcoming fiscal year, and to please provide a quote on the impact of LIHEAP from a utility vendor. Section 5 is the remarks section for you to provide any additional explanation regarding the reliability or validity of the report. And section 6 is a certification, is where you as a grant recipient certify the report. Now we're going to move into the question and answer part of the webinar. As a reminder, we are asking participants to enter their questions into the Q&A area section of the screen. Katie, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions quite yet. So as a reminder, folks, the Q&A box is down at the bottom of that Zoom screen to the left of the chat function. So if folks have questions, please put them there. Okay, Heather, so we do have one question. So for accepting feedback on this report, does that mean that you are willing to make substantive changes to the report? Should they be necessary? Or are we at the stage where only minor changes may be made? It's a good question.
Do you want to start, Katie? I can finish up or?
Sure, yeah, I can answer that one. So because of the nature of the emergency request, we have 6 months of approval to use these forms as is. So I believe that takes us through, let's see, we got the approval in February. So we have until October to use the report we have as is. If we receive, we will be as an office carefully going through all of that feedback we received, similar to what we did for LIHEAP. If some of you also run LIHEAP programs, you saw in our response to the first 60-day comment period, we created a table where we listed every single comment we received, whether or not we were taking a change, and then the reason why. So if we weren't able to make a change, we explained why that wouldn't be possible due to grantee burden, or possibly OCS was collecting that data in another situation or through another method other than a quarterly report. So we'll do something similar with the LIHEAP report. And right now we will be taking feedback and looking at that for the remaining quarters of the year. And then any more substantive changes to the quarterly report likely would be made for future fiscal years. Heather, anything to add there?
No, Katie, I think you really covered it. Again, we encourage you, if you want to make public comments, to do that. And those public comments are being received through April 17th. We will be responsive to that. And so we encourage you, if you have public comments to make, to really communicate through that process.
Okay, so we have another question here. Will we be submitting separate quarterlies for regular and American Rescue Plan funds, or are the household counts cumulative between all funding sources?
You will not be submitting separate reports for separate funding sources. You will include all the assisted households no matter what funding is used. However, as you noted in section 3 of the report, we ask you to split out what you've obligated under each funding source, including your regular block grant and the American Rescue Plan funds. That's the only time we're asking you to tell us about the total obligation of those 2 funding amounts. So as far as when you're doing your unduplicated count in section 1 or section 2 for the occurrences, that will include anybody you provide services, no matter what LIHEAP funding source it's from.
Thanks, Heather. We have one question about whether or not there will be a chance to view the recording. Absolutely. We plan to get this recording up and posted to our website as soon as possible. I will put the link in the chat to where that webinar recording will be housed. We'll also be uploading a copy of the slides to that website, and I'll put another PDF of the slides in the chat right now. Then Heather, we have a question. When will the updated report template be available?
So the current report, we have already issued this out through a DCL, and maybe we can post that again. It'll be on our last page of this presentation, but we have a draft of that report and the instructions already sent to you. The final report we're working on comprising our action transmittal around that. And we will have that report and we'll work to get instructions on how you will submit that. But we're just getting that kind of finalized for the final draft. But if you want to start your work, I would work off the drafts. We don't think there's going to be any changes from those drafts and what we presented in this webinar today. So we just want to let you know that we will follow up with an action transmittal and you will be told, and we will attach the official form you'll use to submit the quarterly reports.
Heather, another good question, and one that we've spent a lot of time as a team talking about. So could you go into the reasoning behind asking for unduplicated quarterly household counts than duplicated cumulative counts?
Sure, thanks for the question. We are trying to assess when we're responding, as well as you are, is how many, not total assistance provided at this point, but we also ask this question of state and territories now. People are very interested in knowing how many households were assisted, no matter what type of assistance they received. So if I came in one year and I received heating assistance and then crisis assistance and then cooling assistance or crisis assistance in the summer, they were really wanting us to track, and we have been tracking that, like I said, with states and territories for several years now. Well, they always come back and say, well, how many households is that, right? Because if we track it just by program components, that shows duplication of the households we're assisting. And so that's been a long-term request that we get, how many total households, regardless of what their program component, or regardless of what assistance they came in for, LIHEAP, are you really helping? And so I know that's new for the tribes. It's been in place for the states and territories probably for about 10 years now. And I would really encourage you to reach out to your program specialists or us here at OCS for technical and training assistance on how to do that. I know it's a lift because I've been through it myself and how you do that, but there's a very progressive way of doing that, and we can provide you information about that.
Any other questions from folks?
Well, not hearing any other questions. If you do have questions, again, as we indicated at the start of this webinar, this is the start of our series of technical and training and technical assistance opportunities. Our next step include, as Katie indicated earlier, conducting office hours. We've also included on this slide resources you can access on the OCS website, including the Dear Colleague letters that were issued in January and February concerning the LIHEAP Quarterly Reporting. We also included our DEA contact information link, so you can contact, you have the contact information about your program specialist as well as any of the Division of Energy Assistance staff. We're here to help, and we want to help as much as we can and provide any assistance we can. So if you have additional questions, again, I always tell people this is the start of a conversation, not the end of one. So we encourage you to attend the office hours. You may also want to reach out to your program specialist or any of us for assistance again. And you can always email us with questions. We will try to do the best we can. We'll be responsive and get back with you and let you know. Because sometimes going through these training sessions, I even noticed it myself, is, oh, I get right off the training webinar and I thought, gosh, why didn't I ask about this, right? So don't feel like you can't reach out to us and ask those questions. Attend the office hours, send us questions in advance so we can answer those common questions that people might have about LIHEAP Quarterly Reporting. We're excited to have the ability to hear from you during a current federal fiscal year, what your training and technical assistance needs, what your challenges are, but also what the great work you're doing and the success you're having. And so we've been doing a lot of work around trying to promote LIHEAP to reach more people because we know the need is there, and we really want to assist you in servicing those customers. So as noted earlier, the LIHEAP Quarterly Performance and Management Report is still undergoing O&B, or Office of Management and Budget process approval. So again, we've kind of indicated that here on our last slide. We've done a lot around the last few initiatives of promoting grading resources with your other programs. including the emergency rental assistance, which may or may not be located with you, or maybe another office. But we really want you to provide those services. And I know the tribes really strive for that in making sure that they provide wraparound services for the customers that they're serving. And so we have some information about that. We've issued a lot of webinars and training around the American Rescue Plan and coordinating those benefits with the emergency rental assistance program. And then in addition to that, during the anniversary of the American Rescue Plan funds, we launched a website. Well, not a website, I'm sorry. We have a page dedicated to that anniversary, which includes 2 videos from LIHEAP and 2 videos from LIHEAP, the water program, and 1-page documents that can be used to summarize the activities around what's happened with the American Rescue Plan and what all the hard work that you guys are doing day in and day out. It doesn't go unrecognized. And we certainly appreciate everybody's effort in assisting your members and your customers, as well as administering this low-income home energy assistance program. Before wrapping up, did we get any more questions?
Yes, Heather, we did. So just a follow-up question, looking for more clarity on why we want a duplicated cumulative count. And Heather, before I toss this over to you, I'll flag for folks, and I'm not sure if we highlighted it as we were walking through the template, but that is a cell that will automatically calculate. So that is not something that grant recipients need to do on their own as they're going through the quarterly reports. That will automatically calculate in quarter 3, we'll get a cumulative count, and then in quarter 4, we'll also get a cumulative count. But I'll turn it back to Heather to talk a little bit about the differences there between the unduplicated and duplicated count.
So when we're looking at the unduplicated count, we're looking at the total households served by any grant recipient with the funding, with the LIHEAP funding that they receive. When you have program components like you guys currently report on the LIHEAP household report for the short form, you're showing all the program components and what households received each one of those program components. So it's just a different way to look at the data. It's like I said, we want to know total number of households that receive LIHEAP assistance. You also notice on your short form, we ask for, well, how many received heating assistance or cooling assistance? So we're asking for it in 2 different ways to be able to report on 2 different data points, to make a point that we're reporting on the actual households that receive LIHEAP assistance. Now, on the cumulative totals, we understand that they're going to auto-calculate, but I wanted to make a point that when you're counting on duplicated counts, it's when it happens in that quarter. So if I get heating assistance and crisis in the same quarter, you count that household 1 time. If I get it in different quarters, you would count it every time I received it. So if you administer payments, for example, one example I heard was, well, we approved for energy assistance in October. The example we gave was try to simplify things. We know that energy assistance happens throughout the entire program year, or it can happen through certain program timeframes. But you may pay out 3 different payments during the year. Every time you're providing that assistance, we would want you to count that household. So it wasn't done to say that payments don't come differently to the household, but what we're saying is that they receive more than 1 type of assistance in that quarter, we only want to count it once. And we are trying to capture that number of all the households assisted, even if they receive different types of assistance. I hope I clarified that better.
Heather, we received another question here. So does staff turnover have any effect on the initial plan that was made when this request for funds was made? Are there any consequences if the initial plan doesn't go in that direction?
We recognize that the tribe and tribal organizations have had significant issues, not only with staff turnover, but during the COVID and wildfires of last year and the heat. We definitely recognize that. We've heard that. We are starting out with this report. It's required of all grant recipients. At this point, this is our requirement. I would recommend, if you need assistance, to contact and reach out to us and let us know what's happening. And then we can try to work through each issue that you have. But at this point, we are not providing any, I want to say, optional use. We're really just requesting that everybody provide this information. It is critically important, and in particular with the obligation information. We're getting a lot of requests about how ARP is being spent as well as the regular block grant. And there's this concern that all of those funds get obligated by September 30th, 2022, because I don't think anybody on this call or anybody in OCS would ever want us to see us return funding to the Treasury that we know is so desperately needed by our low-income customers because of the need out there. And you know, we know there's been moratoriums in place, and there's huge arrearages and large arrearage balances. And although their services may have continued, those moratoriums are coming to an end, and those bills are large. And we don't want people starting out, you know, a step behind. We want to be able to assist them in any way. So one thing I will share with you that we've heard that's happened with, and this is a little bit off topic, with other grant recipients is they're identifying those large balanced bills, and they're utilizing some of the American Rescue Plan funding. Not that it's a requirement, not that I'm saying this is policy. I'm sharing noteworthy changes that people are making and saying, you know, the real issue isn't getting them out of the crisis of today, because they're going to be right back in here next month or the month after needing more crisis assistance. The real issue today are these large arrearage balances. So let's pay it all off, put someone even, and then start forward and moving forward and making it more affordable to pay their bills. I would never want anyone have to choose, and we've all heard these stories between whether they're going to have heat or cooling or eat today or take medication. That's just, you know, we need to ensure that people have the resources they need to pay their and to live and be comfortable and safe.
And we have one more question in the chat, and maybe I'll ask Rich if you can go back, please, to slide number 14. I think that would be helpful, just our table with the how to count these unduplicated counts within the quarter. So Heather, the question is, so if we paid 3 utility bills for the household in the quarter, we would count their assistance as 1.
Right. So I see what you're saying. That's a really good question. Thanks for asking it. So if you provide heating assistance and you, I'm just going to use it as an example because most of us do heating assistance. So if you provide heating assistance and you paid on their gas, or you did a propane delivery and their electric, that would count all as one heating assistance household. You could have someone that came in, they got the heating assistance benefit for the deliverable fuel like propane or natural gas, but then you use crisis funding for their electric. For reporting purposes on unduplicated households, that's still only one household, even though they're using 2 different components of your program, which is different than how you report on the short form for the households, because you report them by component. So it's a little different. But I do want to make a point that if they come in for heating assistance in October or November, they get a deliverable fuel, and it also covers their electric bill. And then they come back for crisis in April or May, or even possibly in the summer for summer cooling, or an air conditioning unit, say a window unit. Then they're going to count in Q1 for that heating assistance, and they're also going to count in Q4. And so say they come back in Q4 and they get, instead of the air conditioning unit, they get some more assistance with their cooling bill. Again, you're only going to count that household no matter how many times they receive a payment or combination of the same component or different components, different fuel sources. You're only going to count that household one time in that quarter. So when you start going through and looking at your systems, because some of this can be, you know, a spreadsheet, some of it can be in a data system. Usually what I've seen, and this is just what I've experienced, is you start with your largest program that you provide assistance through. I don't know that that's going to be heating assistance for some of you. It could be your cooling assistance program. But if you take that population and then compare your crisis and your weatherization towards those numbers, anything duplicated out, only count it once. So you kind of start with your largest population program component that you serve, and then you do a comparison to the next one and the next one. And then what happens is you get your crisis only and your weatherization only and you add them together, and that's what gives you that unduplicated count per quarter. Nothing's ever as easy as we make it sound. It does take some thought process to go through this. And I certainly understand that more than anyone. So I really encourage, and OCS understands, encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about that. We will be providing additional technical and training around those issues and do whatever we can to help you.
Heather, we have another question, just circling back to your comments earlier about covering a large delinquent balance. So can we cover a large delinquent balance with ARP funds to get the resident on a positive balance?
You can cover large arrearage funds with any of your funding to get someone back to a positive balance. So this is something, again, I want to really reiterate, this is a block grant, right? You all develop your rules, your policy and procedures. And so many of us for many years, and I say us, I was a former grant recipient, but many years we would issue the same benefits. You know, we do heating assistance, we do cooling assistance, we do crisis, we do weatherization. And I think COVID kind of turned us all up on end and saying, and then the additional funding on top of it, how can we help people and what's the real need? Because we haven't had this type of funding. This is historical funding. We've never had this much. And so some states and grant and territories were looking at, well, what the real problem here is, when we look at it, is it's the huge arrearage balance that accrued during COVID because there were moratoriums put in place. And so they are targeting some of those large arrearage balance households and saying, we're going to pay the entire past due household. You as the block grant recipient have the discretion to make, with that flexibility, to make those type of payments. You need to think through. I would suggest, if you do that, contact program specialists, but we have other people that are doing this, but there's a process to think through. You're going to want to put a cap someplace on that, right? You may want to have an upper limit, and sometimes you can talk to your utility partners and assess what those past due arrears are, what the average balance is on the past due arrears. But yes, we've seen that happen, and you do have that flexibility. And in light of all the funding you have right now, this would be a great opportunity if you can take that action to help those households and put them back on level playing field instead of being so completely behind.
Thanks, Heather. And that's our last question for now.
Well, thanks for asking those questions. It's so helpful for us to hear from you. And again, don't hesitate to contact us. We just really appreciate your joining us today with your time. Appreciate all the efforts you make on behalf of the citizens and your members. And just want to be there to do anything we can to support you in what you do, because ultimately that's what this program is about, is helping our low-income citizens stay warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And we support you in that effort in any way we can. So again, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for participating. And don't feel like this is the end of the conversation. Please reach out and contact us if you have any questions or need any assistance. So with that, we're going to give you 10 minutes back of your day, which we all can need, even to take a break. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.